Welcome to Season 2 of Pod Practice, where Mama Bird alumni Quinn Feiner, Mikey Lund, and myself, Alex Atkins, talk about Ultimate from the perspective of players and coaches. We want to engage with you, so please reach out, say hi, ask a question, give some feedback. We look forward to talking with you. To reach out, follow us on Instagram or YouTube at podpractice_pod. Listen on Spotify at Pod Practice, or email us at show@podpracticepod.com. I hope you enjoy this episode.
Oh, dude, this grab, by the way, absolutely insane.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Welcome back to another episode of Pod Practice. We've gotten good fan responses from our deep dives into specific Ultimate tactics or motions, I guess you could call them. So Mikey and I are back today to talk about a little bit of one of our favorite Ultimate motions. Shout out to our sponsor, B Ultimate, for giving us some sweet gear like the hat Mikey's wearing. And shout out to Mikey for making some Season 1 t-shirts that we've already sold a few of. They are a limited release, so get them while they're hot, because I honestly have no idea how many are left, but I'm going to guess it's not that many because it's not like we made 1,000 of them. These aren't mass produced, all right? These are limited edition Season 1 Pod Practice shirts.
Yeah, and we also have the Otaku tee, the black one. We've sold a few of those too, but the Season 1 ones have been kind of flying off the shelves. I've been going to the post office almost every day.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, you know it's a good product when on an Instagram post, Pavel makes a nice comment.
Yeah.
Like if Pavel's not making
nice,
like a sarcastic, joking comment about it, it's probably amazing, because anything below that standard would just be ripped apart by Pavel.
That's absolutely true.
So today, Mikey and I are going to be talking about a little Dominator. Okay. Nothing new to Ultimate, I would say. It'd be great if we had I'm hearing my dad's voice. Back in the 90s, we ran a Dominator. We just had 4 people. So I'd love a history of some Dominator. It's not new, but it's definitely been coming into favor recently with teams running it with lots of success. Definitely Brown, definitely North Carolina. So I really wanted to start off by asking you, what is a Dominator? Mikey, how would you describe this Dominator motion?
Good question. And I would love to know why it is called a Dominator. Now you were asking the historical questions. I have no idea why.
I mean, I would guess because some people are dominating the possession. They're dominating the they're dominating the point. You know what I mean? If you think about Brown, you think about Leo and Jock dominating the attention, everything. Right. So it could derive from that. That's a guess. I don't know, but it makes sense to me.
If you do know, let us know. Most typically, what I think of when I think of a Dominator, and I think the most classical interpretation is a 3-person weave, usually a lot of short throws to space, handler type cuts and handler type throws to move the disc forward. Usually teams have will run it in the end zone or run it off of a pole up to a point. I feel like when we really started seeing it, I probably have the timelines wrong, but in 2019, we played Brown in semifinals in the hot Texas heat, and they were dominating with the Dominator. So maybe that is why it's called a Dominator. And I didn't think they'd be able to last in that heat, running through so few people. Um, but when you do it efficiently and when you do it well, it's very sustainable. Um, and we also saw Ring of Fire in 2019 running it a lot in the club scene. Uh, Kins was mentioning that North Carolina runs it a lot, also in the college level. In the club level, when we had Denardis on, I think he told us they pretty much just ran Dom the whole year. If you watch that 2019 semifinal against Sockeye, you'll see them running a lot with Jack. I can't remember who I was playing over that year with Jack, but it's usually Jack and friends. Yeah, so that's the basics of what a Dominator is. And has evolved a little bit, I would say, before we get into some footage here, in terms of where people might start the Dominator from. And also, we're going to show some truck stop footage and how they use pretty similar concepts as cutters to attack similar spaces.
And there's so many ways, there's so many places to begin where we could start to dive into this. But first, because last episode we had a little conversation on resets in general. Can you distinguish these two categories a little bit so that, because there's a lot of similarities in what there's going to be a lot of overlap in what we're talking about, because in some ways a big part of the Dominator is a lot of reset type cuts, right, I suppose. So can you distinguish the two things, like what we're going to talk about today and what we talked about with just resets?
Yeah, I can define it, at least in the ways how we kind of talk about it with Bravo. And I should even before that mention that there are different ways to run this, and you should definitely check out, like, Jack Williams literally has a video on running the Dominator. For us, it really should be hard to distinguish between resets and a Dominator. We try to break our offense into phases, and trying to avoid using all of our language, but what we would categorize resets specifically as something that is not necessarily pressing the defense. It's not necessarily putting pressure on them or necessarily moving the disc forward. Ideally, we are almost never having to reset the disc in the way that I like to define it. But I would consider a reset something more passive that is resetting the stall count, not as concerned about, I guess, to say it again, pressing the advantage. Another difference that maybe more people would be familiar with is most teams, when they call a Dominator, they run it for a significant chunk of time or part of the field. Whereas resets, they just happen organically when the offense stalls out.
Yeah, and it is interesting because the lines are definitely becoming a little bit blurred, especially with teams kind of running these Dominator motions as their offense. It can be tough to know the difference between, like, what we're talking about with all of our attacking resets, because I think that's a good point. Like, when we were talking about resets last week, we were talking about I especially was saying, like, I really like these, like, forward attacking resets. I don't really like these traditional, maybe, like, you throw it back with negative momentum or things like that. And so it's kind of becomes a little not obvious when,
Yeah.
Like this Dominator offense is really just kind of leaking over into offense
Right.
that is successful. And that's where maybe it can be a little confusing. And so really we're diving deeper into these kind of motions today. And it's almost like an extended version of what we were talking about
Last
last
week.
week.
Yeah. Um, what should we do? Should we start with some? Should we describe more rules or just
I
jump into
think
film?
for me, what makes sense to start with is, well, I think a good question is like, why would you run a Dominator? Like, what are the benefits of
Yeah,
running it? Why would you start running it? Like, where on the field would you like to run it? And like, what's beneficial about this type of motion?
yeah, and I want to get your thoughts on that too. Um, let's see. I would call it a very sustainable offense. It's you can pretty much you can run these against junks. You can run these against in inclement weather, as you as Brown proved. Um, at college nationals. There's always a tipping point. If you think about DC Breeze at championship weekend, those conditions were just so crazy that you had to play field position. But at the highest level of ultimate of frisbee, possession is king, and those longer throws, higher risk throws, higher variance throws, they're risky, and it
So, like, maybe where do you think running a dominant, like, talk about the different times on the field during points where you think it's good to run a Dominator?
yeah, that's a good question too. I'll say it simply: is most teams do run a dominator in the end zone at this point. Most people are running 3v3 motion. Uh, you know, dark side, Pleiades. I feel like they're still the gold standard. I really do feel like we've gotten a lot better at it, and everybody around the country has gotten a lot better at it around the end zone. I would describe their style as a little bit different, where than Browns, for instance, where they are a little bit more. I don't know if timing based is the right word, but the way that they'll try to time stuff from the one instead of letting the one or that ISO person attack regularly. The other typical time when you call it is off the pole to start a possession. In 2022, when we won, we had a great trio by nationals with Danny Landisman, Kel Stoughton, and Cole Wallin. Um, Funny enough, though, I feel like the one point we put you in it in finals was that like one of our two turnovers. Do you
Yeah.
remember? I
Yeah.
think
I
it
think so.
was.
I think so.
I
Definitely.
won't blame you for that, but you were still coming back from injury.
Yeah.
So
You
those are
want
the
some quicker people for sure. More change of
yeah.
direction.
You definitely have the skill set to run it down.
At that time, not as effectively, though.
Maybe not. But if you watch that game, the 2022 final, you do a lot of that like counter motion, especially when you have bigger guys on you when you get into the resets. So those are I would say those are the basic times when you would most likely call it.
Yeah. And you said even to start, after a pull, but even more broadly, just to start the possession. So if you're
Possession.
a D line that is picking up the disc, it can often be beneficial to start. I mean, this is like one of your big things, which is, starting with this smaller motion to gain the momentum downfield to allow you to start hitting uh, bigger unders. Because as a lot of people know, when the disc is moving quickly, and that's when it's the hardest to guard a defender downfield. When I pick up the disc on the sideline, every defender knows where it is, and they roughly have a pretty good idea of what areas they need to take away. And a really sophisticated defense will even, have multiple defenders taking away the most dangerous areas, making it nearly impossible to, especially the closer you are to the sideline, to advance the disc immediately. So this kind of quick movement can really get the defense on their toes and put them in a tough position. And then, like you said, in the end zone, because there's nothing else, you really have no other option because you can't throw it deep. So, I mean, you could have still like cuts from the back, but when you try to do that, you run out of space very quickly. And so, yeah, it's another really effective place to run the Dominator. And then I have another question for you, which is, who is good at running a Dominator? Like, what kind of attributes to players are effective for, and we talked about it a little, not necessarily big, slow guys, although not like they can't be effective at it, because there are a lot of other skills that could still help you be very effective in a Dominator.
Yeah, like length and etc.
Timing.
I do think that the physical attributes are probably broader than you would normally think of. Like the prototypical type is small, quick guys, but like you're not small. You are good at it. You are definitely quick for your size. I think a lot of it is the important things are people that read the field quickly. They'll go through their reads quickly and are good at changing pace. Have good footwork. Obviously, explosivity is very helpful. Quickness is very helpful. Good break throws are very helpful. But even more than good break throws, I'd say, are good touch throws. Like we had Calvin Brown on, and I'm sure he'd be more than capable of running a good Dom. But he talked about it not necessarily being a current strength of his, and his throwing type. You think of Calvin, probably the first thing that comes to mind is power thrower, not small space thrower, even though he's probably able to do it. But it's more important to be good in small windows than be able to throw big chunkers, obviously, because you're not even trying to throw those.
And it's interesting you mentioned reading the field. We had a question recently about someone feeling, I forget who it was. We'll figure it out, put it in. But they emailed us and they were like, "How I think one of the most intangible skills is reading the field and processing these things. And how do you assess that, like during a tryout, I guess, because they want people like that on the team." One way that comes to mind is take someone who you already know is good at it and put them in a 3v3 set or a 2v2 set with another person and see if they click with that person, because there is something to be said about that unspoken understanding of threats and the progression of threats between multiple people. And that, I think, is a good way of identifying. And, that can come with time, but that is a good way of identifying who's able to be on their toes and thinking during a possession and figuring out what's the threatening space, those kinds of things.
Right. I think that's a great idea. That is a hard thing to evaluate, but that's a great way to do it.
Right. Like if you put someone in, like I just think of like putting someone in with like Nut. Like if they're on the same page and it's tough because if they've never done it before, obviously they'll struggle with some things, but if they're able to get there relatively quickly and you have it with someone like Nut, who's obviously very high on the spectrum of reading these things in time, then you will know pretty quickly if they're able to do it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. All right. Is it film time or?
I think it's fill time because I think the next question is like we got to get into some of the motions and cuts, and like I think I would just want to ask you like how to run it. How would you? So let's start at the beginning. Let's say you're starting a possession, or would you rather do an end zone version, which are similar? So let's just say either
Yeah.
way, how would you set up a
In a
3-person
default way.
Dominator?
Yeah, the good question, and I think we can quickly go into like the different styles of a dom here. But if you're middle third of the field, and the force doesn't really matter, but we'll put a forehand mark on here. Well, force does matter. What we like to do is we like to identify the thrower, the ISO who's upfield, and the reset. So we can talk a little bit about positioning later. I think we'll actually, maybe this is a good time to plug. Our plan is to actually create a course for this with real nice film examples and drills to run. But as a default, this is typically what we like to see. And the reason why you want to start slightly offset of the thrower as the ISO is Frisbee 101. It's just to create multiple threats. If you set up right on top of the thrower, we talked about this last week. One of the difficulties is you don't necessarily you're not able to immediately access this space with an easy throw. That's why we offset there. I mean, you can, but it's a little more difficult. So this is the default shape. What's next? What else did you just ask?
Well, and this is in the middle of the field.
This is in the middle of the field.
So what about if we're on the sideline?
So sideline, trap versus wide. So we'll start trap. Exactly like we were talking about last week. So generally, we'll go with defaults here, right? We start positive as a reset, and then I'm running our real estate on my screen, but somewhere positive of that person would be the ISO. And in this situation, we are trying to work it through the reset first, or asking that person to clear. One key that I'll quickly mention while it's on my mind is a cue that we like to try to talk about is against these defenders. If this person is clearing up line, I often ask you guys to try to win the outside shoulder. So attack this way versus this way. Both are fine. And in fact, the inside shoulder, you can still get a lot of other stuff off of it, like we talked about last week with the line counter. But I like to have you guys try to win the outside shoulder to force this person to turn. And also because if they overcommit to the space, you can just stop right here.
Yeah. And like the one thing I would say about this that I've been thinking about.
Yeah, what do you have to add here?
I just wonder, and I think it's because, sometimes that works super well. Like I was for a long time in the camp of have that reset start, go to that reset first, try to hit them on an upline or a free swing around if you can. And if not, you go to the one. And then that works really well. Yeah. But like all things, so like at practice, we run this a lot. And I think it started to get a little predictable. That person would try to go up line. They usually the defender usually knows they're going up line, trying to get something up line, shuts it down. It doesn't really cause a threat that any of the defenders have to respect. And then the person defending the one, the ISO, can really prevent against the fill. Because typically a very classic ultimate motion you're going to see is that reset going up line and the one coming down. And that works really well, especially when the initial reset cutter makes a very threatening upline cut. When it runs into issues, if they make a very threatening upline cut and continue to keep going, it serves two purposes. One, it creates a threat that the defense had to respect. And two, it clears space for the one to attack both the fill and also the space immediately in front of the disc for an upline cut, which is ideal to have set up both of these cuts. Because then as a defender, you're put on an island. You have to pick one, whichever, they pick.
Yeah, we'll have a sort of a very similar example to this in the first point we play.
Mm-hmm. When it runs into issues is when you just start running the motion for the sake of running the motion, which is having the upline person clear, and it doesn't create a threat. If
a lot of times the defender just stays.
A lot of the times the defender who was guarding the initial reset, as they leave the space, can turn around and look to help a little bit, taking away the upline space for the ISO, causing them to have to go backfield for the fill if that defender plays it really well. And this is like, if you're really getting into it, like for most teams, most stuff, don't overthink it. Run a hard upline, get the fill. It works great. I remember YCCs. We were playing mixed and DC was killing us with this, and it was driving me nuts. They had these they had Ella and then this girl who went to Oregon, and they would like get this fill every time, and it's like we couldn't stop it. And it was like I was driving me freaking crazy. So most people just do this. It's great. Once you get to a point where this motion's more familiar, I wonder the point of always having that reset clear upline. And I wonder if, I think a lot of this could potentially be, when I was thinking about it, a lot of it is matchup based. So there were a couple instances where maybe our not most athletic cutter is in the reset with a really great defender on them. There's really no point in having them start with this motion because the great defender is going to stop them from getting open.
Not respect it,
and not have to respect it, and also be able to be heads up. So I think in a situation like that, have them start where you would see more of like a wide force reset traditionally start. I think in a space significantly more negative, so pretty much like at the bottom of your screen in the middle right now. Have them start there and just go to the one immediately, because effectively you're doing the same thing. You've created space for the one to go up the line and also fill down. And obviously there's the potential that, so if the person guarding the reset in the backfield stays tight, then fantastic. You've done everything you wanted. The one can go wherever they want and get the disc. So problem solved. The obvious problem that you may run into is if the defender decides to not commit to, the reset defender decides to not commit to guarding his matchup or their matchup tightly, sags off a little bit, maybe even with the disc or somewhere like there. Oops. And now if that defender and the one's defender work together, the one's defender can take away the upline space and the reset defender can take away the backfield space. But I'd argue from a sideline, this could be very beneficial for an offense, because if given the opportunity to take a free swing off the sideline, we would generally take it. And in this situation, with the reset already in the backfield, they have the potential to be catching the disc with forward momentum because their defender is so far off them. So they'll have vision of the field and are in the middle of the field. So I think this variation of starting the motion from the sideline could be just as effective.
And you're talking even if it's just like timeout or like the disc rolled out of bounds and you're picking it up right here.
Yes, I think yes. And you could also, I think there's also times where you would do this in a live play, potentially if you don't want to waste the time of that reset. Because sometimes the reset is so far back, it may take them 4 to 5 seconds just to get up line. And there
Right.
you may say,
so
I would opt to have them attack aggressively up line, would be my first choice if it's going to create a reasonable threat. But if they're unable to do that for certain situations, I think it's acceptable and could be very effective to have them stay negative of the play.
So what negative, what do you think about them just doing that?
Just leaving
away from the frisbee.
I like that, but again, I think it's you run into the same thing of is it a threat? Because if the defender doesn't accept it as a real threat, then they're gonna do the same.
You'd have to be able to throw this one.
Exactly.
And some people can. Pavel used to do that for us a lot when he was at CU.
Totally. That's why so much of this is personnel dependent, which really adds a whole nother layer that if you're really going in depth about it.
What about just not having a dump?
I think that also...
What if everybody's just more positive?
I think that also is a great option.
Yeah. I think the most important thing is you really can't get stuck in this space, right?
You can't be stuck in there because that's part of where we need to go. And the one thing I like about having a dump is I think you would get a lot of situations where you would get a free swing
you might just
positive
a lot of times it's just easy to get it off.
Yeah, but I know teams have done no dump in the past, and I mean it's all just figuring out how you're going to create this space.
Check out this screenshot
for people to attack.
We're getting a little ahead of ourselves. We haven't even watched any of our film yet, but I have this screenshot that's sort of relevant to what you're talking about. Almost. It's not exactly, but so this was the Machine Truck US Open quarters, and this was a roller pull. So A-Roy's picking up the disc on the sideline. And you can see Machine is already in like this shell. Like they have two under defenders.
Their shell. It's so
and then their other defenders somewhere over here. They're face guarding this, trapping this, and then I forget his name. He's a guy that I think broke his arm in our game.
Did he break his arm when he skied Denny?
Yeah, he had to go to the ER.
I did not know that.
So what I like about this works great, right? But here's another formation change. Like Truck immediately recognized this. This is again a roller pull. This is Malks. They're set up in more of like a spread or horizontal or a zone. It's almost like a double team in UFA. And Taimon's way over here on this sideline. Like they have them spaced out laterally, big time. And I can't hit play on this. I do have it clipped, but this is just a screenshot. What happens is I think Norbom also cuts back, but Taimon will. You can even see him. He's pointing to Malks, and Malks just comes back and gets it. So I bring this screenshot up for two reasons. One is how I'm constantly impressed with Truck's ability to recognize things on the fly. And two, when you have the disc on the sideline, the most important thing is to just get it off the sideline. And they're using their whole focus is to do just that.
Yeah, and I love that. I love that so much. Like both of those things. It's funny because the really good teams maybe have some advanced things that they're doing, but I really am more in the camp that they do the really basic things very well. Like at all levels, you're trying to get the disc off the sideline, And at all levels, you need to recognize and adapt, problem solve quickly as a line. And
Yeah.
they are just the best at doing it.
Cool. So, film time?
Yeah, let's get into some film.
We didn't really talk about wide side, flat side, but that's okay.
I think they're similar.
I will mention one really quick thing, and that is a difference between North Carolina and Brown, at least to our understanding of as outsiders, is North Carolina is more strictly throw open side, go open side, and um, the adage of throw a dump, become a dump. So this person will come here. Mm-hmm. Brown does not do that. And it is also something that we don't actively, that's not something that Bravo practice we're talking about right now. We're more focused on attack, really.
Attack. I'm all in the attack right now. I'm in an attack mindset.
Okay, here we have an example of Brown running less traditional setup here. Kins has talked about this person as a reset, oftentimes dropping back negative, rarely setting up even on this flat and or wide side. A lot of teams typically play with this person 45 back to give space for upfield people. But here we'll let this play and watch how Brown gets himself out of this sideline situation with some really small space, small ball movement against our defense. You can see here we switched. We rolled this one. Leo tries to split the roll. Doesn't successfully split it, but they are so comfortable in getting the disc in small spaces and maybe a little bit of a travel to help him get it off the sideline. Now, here, after he throws this break to Jacques, is kind of the atypical toes goes or anti-toes goes here. So in this case, when Leo throws this dump, what a lot of teams do typically is he'll drop back as a reset for Jacques and then let Jacques look upfield into this end zone space for another receiver. But what Brown does with their Dominator motion, with their give-go motion, is they just attack no matter what. And we'll see Leo attacks this inside skinny space for a gainer, and it can eventually throw the goal. So this cut here we talk about a lot is something we like to do and something we really try to take away because it's so deadly. So we'll play this first point of Brown. We'll probably play a few points of Brown, a few points of Truck against us, and I mean this. Most of the footage is against us and not of us because that's just
because we get burned by it every year.
So right out, you can see that Jacques is starting this possession with the disc. This is I think it's an out of bounds pull. I actually forget.
Looks like it.
And they start with Leo downfield a lot, even though he's in the dom set or what we would call the dom set. And they'll either flash him across the lane, which is what I think they end up doing, or oftentimes they'll clear this person out and bring him under in that what we call that fury action. So if I just let this one play, you can see he gets it in the middle, and he's basically just off to the races. So it may not look like Dominator too much, but we'll break this down um, from his pass here. So immediately, what you can see is, well, us getting beat on this shallow underspace, which we should never get beat on. But as he throws, he's always looking to run as soon as he throws and gets it right back. So that's a key component of a dominator motion.
And I think that's the key part. Like this part is like the key
Yeah.
piece right here.
And what you were describing earlier, sort of what we were just talking about on a sideline, is what should this person do? Jacques does not, he doesn't even think about staying there.
Love it.
Oops. He's just
He
going to go,
attacks.
and he keeps going. He gives plenty of space for Leo to use this space. So we talked about from the ISO spot being able to threaten in multiple directions. He really has probably 3 dimensions to attack,
Totally.
and Artie's for us is in just a tough spot.
Super tough. And what I like about this too is what we were talking about. Jacques attacks. And what I was saying is, a lot of time Zeke, who's guarding Jacques, may turn around and look because he's in this space that obviously teams would attack and look to threaten that throw.
Just spy that space.
But against Brown and against Jacques, you have the feeling that if Zeke turns his head to do that, Jacques is attacking back to the other side of the field underneath the stack. Like he would punish Zeke. He is never disengaged to the point that would allow Zeke to effectively stop throws to Leo in that space. Because I have a feeling if Zeke really committed to doing something like that, Jacques would slash under to the open side.
Zeke is a great defender, but that takes a very heads up person.
Totally. And it's
when
not
you're flying through space, like when things are happening that fast.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And I think the other crucial thing here is if you go back just a little bit, Leo is doing a fantastic job of, running off of his throws. But right here, very patient. He's not just running like a maniac. He allows Jacques to clear. He sets up that cut to the break side with a few hard steps to the open side. Then makes a nice cut, gets low, and then goes to that space. And that's the worst thing about when teams get it to that space is you often find a quick continue. And in this case, it takes form in a goal.
So what we often say and what Brown does really well is you're not necessarily trying to beat teams with pure speed. You're trying to change pace. And a lot of the times you'll see Jacques and Leo and some of their other guys like start sprinting and then turn into a jog and then go again. Or completely stop
like Leo did there. But he stops in the space that is the most difficult to stop as a defender. Like you said, he gets to a spot where he can attack so many different things that now as a defender, it's going to be trouble.
So this is a turn. We'll only watch this one once, but this cut from Leo here, we'll just quickly mention how he starts by, it all starts by him just constantly being in motion, but it's controlled motion.
Yeah.
We won't spend too much time on that. They get the disc back, unfortunately. This is crazy. Jacques throws this one from his butt.
Yeah, he'll do that too.
Another
oh my god,
wacky one that we should have deed. But you can see they getting a lot of bumps, chisels that give them forward momentum, which is what Kins has been talking about a lot. So as we
Oh,
watch
that's so good.
these next few passes, first when we're behind the disc, what Brown is really good at is always getting a forward pass, even from behind the disc, almost always.
And that
And it's
pass is
something that
just so killer.
we really prioritize taking that away, but they're very good at it. Um, from here at this spot, I would mention two things. One is Leo's patience again, and the cut that he's about to make, which is one that TK has been talking about a lot. It's kind of a J cut or a dip cut, but also watch Rosenberg at the reset, because he is not negative. He's even, but
Mm-hmm.
he is constantly moving,
Yeah, to get it out
and
of
you
the
can
way.
see it like as as Leo starts to take that space, he moves even further.
Mm-hmm.
And then if we focus on Leo, this step right there, that's the one that really seals
Leans
off.
under you. Yep.
Yeah, seals off Zeke as the defender.
And I think like what you were mentioning earlier, what stood out to me on this sequence is the throws out to space with touch. Because when you're doing that, and if you even go back one more to the one Rosenberg throws to Jacques right there, like,
Oh yeah,
I mean, if you're throwing those, you have to commit so hard to taking that space away. Because if you look at how Artie is originally set up, he's set up in front. I mean, he's a few yards in front of Jacques. So in theory, you're like, oh yeah, he's not gonna let him like get something going forward. But the problem is putting that throw to that outside shoulder like that, and Jacques knowing that he's just gonna run to that space is you have to commit so much harder positionally and
right.
physically to taking away that spot on the field. Otherwise, especially that righty backhand
It's that
is
forward
gonna get hit.
momentum. I sent this out in the Bravo Slack, but Robin Fennig was commentating this game, and later in the game, she mentions Leo's ability to get his hips turned forward, and
Mm-hmm.
the same things is happening here with Rosenberg leading past the space. Artie has to work very hard to contain anything because
Mm-hmm.
Jacques is ready to throw this. He doesn't end up throwing it,
But the
partially because of the
motion he gets
space.
off that pump fake is crazy.
Exactly, exactly. That's what makes it so difficult. Now Artie's way off balance, and you might think, okay, they didn't get much, but they're just back kind of where they were. And it's kind of funny. We talk about as defense, we like to make the offense choppy. I feel like what Brown is so good at is they are stop and go. They're change of pace, so
Mm-hmm.
they're comfortable with that
Mm-hmm.
because they know they can get what they want.
And then this throw leading
Another
and
leading pass,
the leading pass and the awareness of Leo to
and yeah,
allow. I mean, I thought he milked it in, but to like allow the disc to get in front of him and kind of knowing that he has Zeke sealed off
yeah,
is really. I mean, it's a tribute to someone who is aware of what's going on very quickly and able to
right.
process it. Like a lot of people may, just attack that disc and go get it right away. And he almost milked it in for a goal, which
The
if you ever have the opportunity to do is important.
the spacing on this one I'll quickly touch on, and let's play one more point of Brown maybe, and then we'll go on and we'll see how we're doing on time. But spacing's crammed, right? But it is the general same idea as what we talked about at the beginning. Jacques is slightly to the open side. He's able to threaten both ways. So if you're talking about attributes that make someone good at this, he is very quick.
Mm-hmm.
And Calvin is honestly, he was maybe the quickest person in college as the defender.
For sure.
But it's just a hard place to be.
Yeah.
You have to commit to that, and it opens up small space throws.
Well, and that's the thing about playing Brown is that because they're breaking the mark so well, that you have to commit to that break side that much more. Like
Yeah.
Calvin commits pretty hard I'm surprised they called that not in. That looked like a goal. But,
yeah. Here's another
but
view
yeah,
of the
this is a
cut.
good angle. Like Calvin commits to this break space so hard because he knows that they throw that most of the time. And
Right.
that is what makes like playing a team like this so hard. And I, in some of the other clips, I saw it as well, where players are getting beat to the open side because you're committing so hard to the break side. Because if you don't, they throw it to the break side, and it just puts you in a real blunder as a defender. Hard to stay disciplined and take away what you need to take away.
Yeah, there are some great examples of Dom from this game. Really, of all their games, I would love to play more of these in their entirety. But maybe we should we watch the drone angle?
I like a drone angle. I think the other thing that comes to mind when watching them, and like we talked about with players being on the same page and recognizing threats, and I remember having this immediate talk with you right after these nationals, was like their understanding of each other and knowing what space is the most threatening, when to counter, like when they're not going to throw it to that space,
right
and
here.
counter. Because if you're not doing this succinctly with your team, you would lead to like a lot of miscommunication, turnovers, because a lot of like the throws are coming so quick, and it can be difficult to play that quick in these small spaces without this kind of chemistry between your teammates. Whereas what Brown is, another thing that Brown is so good at in this is knowing, okay, like because the mark is positioned this way and the defender is positioned this way, the first thing we're looking at is this throw out to space, and you're going to run to it, and I'm probably going to throw it. And if I don't, you're going to break down and go the other way. And those two things combined.
And that's exactly what happens here. We talk about this situation a lot. We've been talking about this actually even today. But Jacques, who just threw this throw, he's in motion. And when you're in motion, you're the hardest to guard. That's just simple math, simple Frisbee. But
physics.
If I let this, it's physics. An object in motion must stay in motion, or something like that.
Tends to stay in motion.
Yeah,
I think.
But look, he attacks this space so hard. Emmett does a pretty good job of giving him space to do this. They always give, Truck does this as well, two Jacques teams. They give plenty of space for someone who's coming from negative to even or positive. They give him plenty of space to cut back this way towards the middle of the field. It may not seem like Emmett's giving him enough space, but let me play it. It's enough. It's enough of a window. I think we lose our drone view, so maybe. But it is these type of cuts that are what make Dominators so difficult, right? Because
a little sleight of hand there from the one. Like that's even the type of thing that they're on the same page. If you go back one, I think both he puts his hand out, but him and Jacques both know.
He's like, you can see right there,
based on how he's defended, that was a fake for Seth to see, and not one that Jacques took seriously, because they both understood with how Seth positioned and where the offensive
same cut from Jacques here.
Yep.
And the argument, I'll skip ahead now. You could easily argue, actually, I want to go back because there's a possession, I think, where they break. The argument that it's tiring on the players involved, that's probably true, right? It does take a lot of work, but you know what also is a lot of work? Turning it over and having to play defense. And if you do this well, watch this point. Like they're basically at the brick mark. I think this does get called back on a travel, but they're going upwind here in stiff conditions, and it takes them 4 passes to get to the goal from the brick mark. 2, They always attack those immediate threats.
That's a very nice
3,
throw.
4. Like that's crazy, right? You think
Crazy.
about when teams are trying to dump and swing, which you should do, by the way, even in the Dom, but are not passive or not aggressively attacking afterwards. That's what makes things inefficient in these types of conditions.
Yeah. And one of the questions I wrote down was, what should you be doing if you're not in the Dominator? And that's another thing Brown makes. Brown puts the defenders not active in the small ball set in a very tough position, because if you want to go and stop what's going on near the disc, you are leaving your person completely. And they often do a good job of finding that person if you do decide to leave them so aggressively. And so it's also very important that the people downfield are spacing well, giving plenty of space, but also know how to attack
When
if
they
their
are being poached.
defender decides to try to stop the people moving the disc.
Right.
And Brown does that very well.
Maybe that's a good transition over to Truck, because Truck does they attack space in a similar way, but pretty much all 7 players are really good at it.
Right.
You'll see how they attack lateral space just over and over and over right away there. They didn't get any of those, but what they do leave space for as well is not only are they attacking like the lateral space to this sideline. Most people know people like to turn this into a butterfly down the line, but they give enough space in this middle intermediate area, and their handlers don't crowd their throwing lanes to the point that they can cut back down in the middle of the field, which you'll see time on get in a moment here.
Mm-hmm.
And you can imagine all the things that can cascade from here, right? Like what we would like to see, or that Truck would often get a bump off of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll let this play, and we can. Noah does get a block on this point.
Oh, this is the first point.
Yeah, but watch how Jacques lateral.
Mm-hmm. He's ready.
There's some
And
stoppage
when he
here.
stops, he's gonna attack it again.
Yeah. Surprised I didn't splice this part out. Yep. And they all attack wide around, or sorry, clear or wide around to leave that space open. Aroy, lateral. And here we're about to get a block, but we'll actually skip ahead because the rest of this point's not important for our lesson here.
Mm-hmm.
This is just a huck blown coverage. I think this was.
Yeah, this is not guarding. Johnny.
Skip again. Here's another thing that I'll mention as Johnny's cutting across. Very typical of not only of Brown but also Truck is these cuts that come from really far. Like we've
really
talked
like
about
this
Johnny
cut.
before. Yeah, like they'll cut early from width a lot, and a lot of times it's like, what are you even attacking? In this case, it's pretty clear. He's about to go score a goal. But that's pretty difficult to cover.
It's so hard to cover. You got to really get out in front of it and be ready to go with it. Yeah.
Here, watch. Let's go back to watching Box's cut for Jacques. As Jacques initiates laterally. Like Box, he decided to plant and turn deep there, but it's it's funny. His name's Box, so like he can plant and attack like this whole box of space, because
Mm-hmm.
they leave space for it, and the way he starts laterally to put Noah on his heels.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And it's funny because growing up playing Ultimate, we tended to think that more vertical cuts were better because the horizontal ones, I guess, were harder to hit and whatnot. But they're proving that
right.
they're
I
very,
mean,
very effective.
this is the situation you were talking about last week, right? Flat, wide side.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's Truck knows how to play against us for sure, and I think they've probably adapted a little bit over the last few years. They're even better at O than they were 2 years ago. A-Roy's not thinking about going negative,
No,
and
he's
the fact
drifting
that they
into that space the whole time.
complete that one is huge for their offense. So
See, and this is one that's actually interesting because Jacques went kind of like I was talking about earlier. Jacques just kept going negative, seeing that Box was kind of floating into the space. Like Jacques not even on the screen there.
right
And
after he
Saad
throws
did stay
this,
tight, and therefore, they threw it to Box in the middle of the field. And I think that's probably just good recognition from
yeah,
Jacques at
yeah.
that
Look at
point
him; he's
to
just
not
sidling
go.
back and back. He's off the
Yeah.
screen. I think that's a good point. It's a really good point. I feel like sometimes when I am happiest at practice, I can think of a time on Tuesday when Sam Van did exactly that, and I was just so stoked.
Yeah, because it just really shows your understanding of what space the offense wants to attack. And if you're able to clear that space as a offensive player and as a teammate, that is a very, very useful skill.
Maybe I'll just sort of let stuff play for a second here, and we can comment on a couple things. Again, Johnny making a really long cut from
Mm-hmm.
negative space. Even though he didn't get it, it gets his defender out of there. Um, I'll mention one of my rules of thumb as they score the goal there, and that is if we do have to settle for a negative pass, that it should lead to a give go or a break opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
and you can see that happen from Jurek there. He's able to get
Mm-hmm.
that around off,
Mm-hmm.
and we saw that already. Yeah, and this is not what we would call classic Dominator by any means. It's just use of similar space that you would think of
Yes.
when you're playing a Dom.
Right. Like I think the main difference you get from watching this and watching Brown, like you were saying, is that all 7 players
Yeah,
are staying involved, which just makes it that much more difficult to guard because
right.
in Brown, where it's a few players cycling through the motion, all 7 of these players are comfortable playing in this motion, but they all cycle through it very quickly and they use a lot of the similar cuts and throws that you
Yeah,
would see. And a lot of their motion is what then causes them to get bigger stuff. And
yeah. And
yeah,
it might not be
that's
the first one, but when they sequence two passes together, they usually gain like 25 yards. That pass right there, super killer. This one to
mm-hmm.
Aroy. It's forward momentum, positive, just inching a little bit closer. And then time on stupid high releases.
Damn it.
Um, do you think I should fast forward a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, Yeah.
Let's I'll maybe play a couple points of the machine quarter with them, and then see how we're doing.
Yeah.
Um, and while I'm pulling that up,
And I think this just shows kind of like what we were talking about at the beginning, which is that while Brown was running, I think what you would consider a more traditional Dominator, you're just seeing a lot of the motions and threats leaking their way into what Truck would just consider offense. But
right,
the like attacking of the space directly in front of the disc from shallow, even negative, to the brake side often is just
creating
so hard to stop and creating
all,
multiple.
yeah, yeah. Um, the difference, I guess, between this game, small one, is Machine does have a different defensive style than we do.
Mm-hmm.
They are a little more poach heavy than we are. You'll see a Roy have a big cushion in a second here, but all the motions again are quite similar. This one's interesting too because whenever I look at offense and look at good teams, I think about people getting mad at practice when things don't go perfectly and like when two people cut to the same space.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? The best teams, it happens to them.
Yeah.
I think that's why you can't really think about script. You got to think about problem solving.
Yeah. Well, it was because it was clear that someone had to attack that space.
Right.
And I'd rather have two people than none. And the fact that both of them had steps into the space is better than
Right. And I'm
not.
circling these two people because this guy is supposed to be defending A Roy. And that kind of cushion, that's definitely a difference between our two teams.
Mm-hmm.
Um, another thing you'll hear college teams, really, honestly, just teams in general, debate over is when should you activate? Is it thrower initiated? Is it cutter initiated? Who decides when to go?
Right.
Um, but Aroy just sees the space and he goes.
Yeah. Yep. And
And then
that
they,
forward
and
pass.
boom, boom, 20 yards
Yeah.
right here,
Because, I mean, there's
15
just no
yards
way Taimon's defender can. It was very difficult.
inside
Another one.
space.
Yeah.
And another freaking long cut. Like, where the heck did Johnny come
Where
from?
the
Like,
fuck did where did Jarrett come from? And then look at he's not even. Oh my god, yeah. And I mean, it's true. Like I just love the cuts from those spaces. Like I've never. That's never been a cut that I think about doing often. And I even had a successful one at practice. And I'm like, it does take. It definitely takes your team not because you're cutting from so far away into that space. Like there is the possibility of someone on your team also running into the space before you get there. But it's just so hard to stop because your defender just usually the way we play isn't really ready for you to go from that space. And if you just start sprinting, you usually get a couple steps and if the your team leaves it open, the space
right.
open.
Yeah, exactly. And, in years past, a, a, a point of growth that we've given to Quinn is he doesn't really make long cuts. We call him a power cutter because
Yeah.
he plants really hard and cuts really hard to get a 5 yard under
Right.
with negative momentum.
That throw's so good. Wow, this could so quickly turn into like a defensive.
Yeah.
Because Machine is so good at this little stuff.
Yeah, look at this. Oh, I will show you. There's actually one later. I'll pull it up for you to watch it there, end zone D. Um, But you've talked about this too, read progressions. Jacques, who, by the way, I'm slowly starting to think is the best offensive player. Very quickly starting to think is the best offensive player in the game right now.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's tough.
I never like to give credit to our players, so
He's
just
one of the
keep that in
best for
mind.
sure. I mean, him and Leo were the two best at pro champs, not on our team, I suppose.
So you've talked about this, right? When you're catching it towards the line, I think you had it probably in mind, probably closer to the line, but how your read progressions go like this, and not necessarily back to the middle this deep, but back to the middle shallow. And Trucks probably scores half their goals this game, where they're checking back down against Machine's junky D to shorter space.
Right.
I mean, it looks so obvious, but part of what those attributes that you were asking about earlier, what makes people good at a Dominator, it's the same attributes that makes people good at sports and Frisbee. It's how quickly do you process things, and that was a turnover, by the way. But
yeah, I was about to say that's a crazy.
How quickly you process those things and hit those tighter windows. Okay. This one. This is just. We actually patterned some of the patterns we ran over the weekend were based off the truck footage. This one we ran, but we did not have the deep cut coming from this wide because we don't have that space the way we set up the drills. But this is such a high value completion, a break mark down the line with positive momentum because of all the things that we've been talking about, and allows Jock to throw this deep shot.
We're taking a quick break to introduce the Be Ultimate Playbook presented by us, Pod Practice. This is a new recurring segment where we ask elite players and coaches to detail a favorite play. The playbook will be published in its entirety on the Be Ultimate website as a free downloadable resource.
So Truckstop runs a lot of stuff. They run a lot of side stack. It's all about concepts for them, in my opinion. But they'll come out in this T stack a decent amount and run different sets out of it. So this time they're just activating jerk and sending them deep. But what I like about this formation is rather than a traditional horizontal where you have 3 people and it's easier to sag lanes, you only have 2 people back. So that's nice. And you kind of get the advantages of a horizontal and a vertical stack, right? Like when we run this, or when anybody runs this, you can isolate someone at the front easily.
Yeah.
You can run a twist, which is basically what they're doing and what they will do later. They also run zippers out of this formation. They run a ton of stuff out of this formation. But what's nice for them is if you have poaching defenders, it's easier to just take advantage of them right away. Or
there you go.
Get blow-bys, things like that.
If your team can't decide on vertical or host stack starting formation,
just do them both.
We found the perfect setup for you. Boom.
I'm bringing this one up because Kins,
you'd
you'd probably recognize this from practice, right?
I just like it.
And the bump back to the middle.
And right back. Attacking from negative. Wow.
Yeah. So, okay.
And that motion is so I mean, that I would say is like the Dominator working, but to its full effect. Like if you just go back to that, like the cuts that Boxley makes, like isn't even really. It's just a reaction to the fact that Jacques is getting this nice break side. Like he just it's not even really a cut. It's just like, oh,
it's a free one.
I realize that this space is now available before my defender does, so you can throw it to me. And then Jacques attacking so aggressively from negative to get that bump with forward momentum keeps their offense moving forward so nicely. And that one was interesting too because Aroy, there's someone right, like it's the similar. I mean, it's a space that even in our Dominator, it's actually really interesting. Like when we set up our Dominator, this was not one of the spaces we said that you like start from. Like we had Jurek and Boxley in our depiction of where to set up, but this like space horizontal, pretty significantly horizontal, and like slightly even from the disc.
Yeah,
that slashing cut is just so hard. I mean, to stop. And I think it's just because that guy doesn't. It's just not a place that teams usually attack from. So his defender just isn't really engaged like Boxley and Jurek Sky are, because as ultimate players, that's where we are recognizing that they're going to cut from the one or this reset, and you're not really expecting this guy
right
in Aroy's position to cut, and then all of a sudden he's catching like a 20-yard upline.
Yeah, it's crazy. He literally just got 20 yards. Yeah, and in the upcoming pod practice Dominator course, we'll definitely talk about different starting structures, the reads off of it, and what's more important. Like in a Dom, you're constantly breaking and reforming formation. Sometimes you want to attack from structure, but a lot of times it's about read and react.
Right, like almost in an ideal sense, you have your structure, you hit a threatening pass, and you're off to the races before you even need to really reset your structure. The structure only needs to be set when you've lost momentum.
I'm going to fast forward and then rewind. Fast forward to finish our B Ultimate play of the week. And then I will rewind to show you Machine's End Zone D. That's kind of
the T-stack.
Yeah, so another T-stack here. And it's a little difficult to see off the screen here. But in this one, they literally just send Jurek deep. I mean, it looks like they are running a twist. And this throw goes up. So, and I think I mentioned this when we got on the call today. Jock is a thrower. He is a fucking wizard. And I want to just talk about the placement of this throw away from the help.
Super heady.
Right? It's so simple, but there are way better examples of him doing this.
No, this is a great example because also Jurek is looking over his left shoulder when Jacques throws it. And so maybe a lot of people throw like an inside out flick here, just like straight to Damaret. But he throws it to the other side, which takes a little bit more power for sure. And yeah. Good luck.
Filthy throw. But anyway, another set you can run out of T-stack. Which at one practice, Becky called it a dirty bird or the Thunderbird. I don't know why.
Maybe because thunder begins with T.
Maybe. Okay, for your sake here, let's look at the Machines. I think this is the one. Yeah,
this is like today's bonus clip.
Yeah.
Machines, awesome heads up end zone defense.
And there are probably more examples of this or in this game, but watch, like, they just overload people. It's I cannot tell you all the rules of their defense, but I mean,
they just put people in good spots and are so good at passing them off, knowing when to
he's not guarding anybody.
Release. Like
he's not guarding anybody.
Right, but they know when they need to pick up someone in their zone, and they know when their zone is ending, and they can release the person into someone else's zone. Like, it's so good. Although
they get scored on. So,
well, yeah, because that seems like I thought Shock was gonna like sit in that space, and then he
yeah. So, I mean, you chalk it up to truck.
Well,
as a
were they
heads-up
really
team
running it
too.
here? I wonder.
Well,
Doesn't
that's
seem
a
like
good
they
question.
were. I don't think they were, because otherwise I think Shock would have stayed in that
I
space.
think Shock tried to pick that guy up and assumed other people were staying in that space.
Yeah.
And Bonet does a good job of splitting the upline space with Boxley here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like
yeah.
it's not the worst thing ever for Machine here. Well, it is the worst thing because they score, but you have Aroy holding it on the sideline for longer than he normally does.
Mm-hmm.
And two people cutting to a similar space. You know, as often as that's a completion, I feel like I see it be a turnover.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, there you have it. That's our B Ultimate Playbook Play of the Week segment.
T-Stack.
Do you want to either answer a question or talk about regionals at all?
I don't really know what to talk about for regionals. My first one in 3 years.
I mean, that
which
could
is
be
kind of
it.
cool.
Um,
So I'm excited. And I think I'm getting more excited. Like I was looking at it as kind of like, regionals, whatever. But then we had practice and people were talking about, sharing their perspectives of not doing well at regionals. And I think that really got me in the mindset to not take it for granted and to really.
it could literally be the last weekend we play together.
It could be the last freaking weekend. And I sure as hell I'm going to do my best to not let that happen. So did you want to do Dylan's question? Is that the one you were talking about? I guess the first thing I saw, which is how do you practice this, which we could touch on really quickly.
Or save it for the course.
Right. So in that case, let's save it. This is just like a juicy nugget because it was like pretty broad. I mean, we talked about a lot of the things. So that's good. And hopefully you get something out of that. But if you're just a freaking nerd and or you think it could be really helpful, because what I think would be a valuable part of the course would having like the collaboration piece, because I think what really advances this kind of stuff is taking different opinions and talking about them and saying, well, what about this and this and this and this and this, and kind of furthering the thoughts. So I think a collaboration part, which is super common in these types of things, would be valuable for everyone involved. So it's like, there would be a course and hopefully like a group that you join as well to comment on the course.
Yeah, that would be cool.
I mean, you see that with everything. Like you subscribe to Ultiworld, you get in a Discord. For my trainer, Brian, you get into a Slack and you can talk with everyone. So it's like just another helpful part of it. And then we can break it down and talk about it even more in depth.
Are we about to start a Discord?
Maybe it's a Discord. Could be any modem.
Yeah. Reach out if you have questions or feedback, thoughts. It's definitely something that we're interested in. Well, at least I've made Kins be interested in it.
I'm interested.
Yeah.
I want to succeed on the field with this type of motion. I mean, I think one of the biggest things, I mean, there's so many takeaways and points that we could have summarized from that, but the most recent of them being the utilization of those long slashing cuts from truck. Just because you don't see that. Like, okay, we know break mark throws are useful. Those types of things. All the other stuff I would say has been around longer, but you don't see other teams have that cut built into their offense the way Truck does.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder how much they talk about it and how much of it is just intuition.
Yeah, it's a good question. It is. Who knows? But it's something to think about for all y'all people
All y'all
who
listeners.
can do stuff with your teams and your stuff. Think about doing new things and don't feel boxed in to what everyone else is doing, because you might just do something awesome. And I think let us know also what would be most helpful to you, just to even further the ideas that could come out of this. Like, what would you find most valuable? Like, who are the, if this is something that you'd be interested in, who are you? What position do you have in Ultimate? Are you a player? Are you a coach? Are you a anything? What are you? What level do you play at? Because that kind of information will greatly help us
Curate.
Oh yes, we hit that right at the same time. Curate this kind of course. So don't be shy. I'm actually super nice to reach out to. Like, anyone can tell you, like, no, but actually, yeah, reach out. All the descriptions are in the stuff. It'll be hugely important, especially if this is something that interests you.
Yeah. Yeah. Please do. Kids won't bite.
No, I'm not a biter.
I am.
But because yeah, I mean, yeah, it's so interesting. It is so interesting to think about how to break it up and all the different things, all the different drills, I guess, that you would do to kind of learn and these techniques as an individual and as a team.
Yeah. 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 It's something that we've certainly put a lot of thought into. And, I already forgot some things that I didn't really point out in film, like instances where North Carolina might have run it differently than Brown. So maybe as part of that resource, we can spell out different ways you could do it.
Definitely, I think that would be a big part of it, is trying to, because at a certain point, when you're at like a truck level, you just have this deep understanding of what you're trying to do on offense. And so rules and different types of cuts are important, but you understand the core so much that you really can be an artist in what you're doing. You don't have to fill in the lines. You get to make the lines yourself. And that's the goal, get everyone to understand it to that level. Because I think one of the coolest things would be to get, if a team could find something like this useful. And I know that, maybe there's one person on the team who understands this really well, but they can't, for the love of God, convince their 25 other teammates to run a freaking fluid, offense, and potentially with a little backup from a pod practice course and just some, they'll be able to get more teams an understanding and of what makes an offense good, and just keep leveling up everything.
The whole sport. Yeah.
The whole sport.
Yeah. I started writing some introduction stuff out for it already for the course. And one of the things I said is don't read it. Don't read this as gospel. Just take it and Make it your own, make it
and
better.
run with it. Because I think one of the goals for this for me also would be to like just start a discussion about the whole thing, and then I think everyone, including ourselves, would just learn so much, you know. So we have all this information already, and we can share it and put it out there, and that, in hope, will just further the development of it all, and we'll all learn a bunch.
We'll all learn together.
You see, the more you read, the more you know. The better you do in school, the better you do in life. That's a promise.
All right, what else?